The Prime Minister this week announced a further $15 million in humanitarian aid for Gaza as critical supplies continue to diminish inside the enclave. It follows Israel's decision to launch a ground raid into northern Gaza overnight in order to prepare the battlefield, they say, ahead of a large-scale invasion. Joining me live is Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister Simon Birmingham. Simon, thanks so much for your time. Another $15 million in aid. Is it the right amount? Are we sending enough?
Look, the funding commitment is something we acknowledge and indeed welcome. Humanitarian assistance going to the right people in Gaza, which are innocent Palestinian children and others who are suffering as a result of Hamas having controlled that strip for too long, Hamas having acted as a terrorist organisation, and Hamas having launched the appalling attacks of October 7 against Israeli children, women, the elderly and others, which have now provoked the crisis that is continuing to unfold in that region. And so ensuring that effective international aid agencies are able to get targeted aid to the right people and that we do see it flow into Gaza is important, and it's the right thing for Australia to be supporting where it is that sort of targeted assistance.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong has pushed back against the Greens' demands that she condemn Israel's siege of Gaza as a war crime in a Senate estimates hearing. Are you aligned with Penny Wong on this?
On that, absolutely. Look, the stance being taken by the Greens and others is disgraceful. We are dealing with a situation where the most appalling and atrocious terrorist attack was undertaken. Let's not forget that the events of October 7 saw more Jewish lives lost in a single day than at any time since the Holocaust. So there is much to remember here in terms of the scale and magnitude. And while every innocent life matters, and we grieve rightly for all, whether they are Israeli or Palestinian or others who have been caught up in this saga, we cannot create circumstances where some sort of false moral equivalence is drawn between the actions of Hamas, who launched a targeted, deliberate assault against innocent civilians, and Israel, who in defence of their nation are trying to disable Hamas from being a terrorist threat in the future.
We've seen those pictures coming out of Gaza, though. It looks like all those airstrikes we have been seeing, it looks like they've completely flattened the place. We've got reports now that over 7,000 Palestinians have died. Are you of the thinking that it's a proportionate response, particularly in the airstrikes that we have seen in Gaza?
Well, a couple of points there, Kenny. We've heard President Biden, during the course of Prime Minister Albanese's visit, offer words of caution about the extent to which death tolls that are reported by Hamas and the terrorist organisations are taken at face value. That's not to say there aren't a significant loss of lives and significant loss of innocent lives. Yes, of course there are, and that's the continuing tragedy of what's occurring here. But I do think it's important we tread carefully in terms of some of the disinformation that's spread. We saw the terrible event last week in terms of the explosion at the hospital that occurred in Gaza, which turned out to be the result of the terrorists misfiring in their own rocket launches and their own activities, and yet that was attributed to Israel. It caused a disruption to the type of talks President Biden was going to be having with Middle Eastern leaders, and therefore they didn't proceed, which was deeply unfortunate when in fact false information, disinformation had been put out there as to the cause of that type of blast. So all of these things need to be treated carefully. I'm a bit concerned actually Prime Minister Albanese still appears to have a post on some of his social media feeds that talks about the deliberate targeting of hospitals, which was put up on the same day of that incident. And I really do urge the Prime Minister and his office to look at removing that post, which creates the wrong type of impression about the cause of that incident, which is where we really do need to see that caution applied.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, he's wrapped up his state visit to Washington. He's met with senior members of the Biden administration and the President. China and the Indo-Pacific was a big focus. Reporting has been positive around AUKUS. The Republicans that were hesitant about the AUKUS submarine deal have pulled back a bit. They now believe that there is enough funding there for local production. Are you confident AUKUS will quickly get back on track once a US House Speaker is sworn in from what you've seen?
All of my dialogue with US counterparts and all of the analysis says there's very strong support for AUKUS across the US Congress. When the former coalition government initiated AUKUS between Prime Minister Morrison at the time and President Biden and Prime Minister Johnson of the UK at the time, we were very keen to make sure it had strong bipartisan support across the US system, and that's endured quite happily. And it's endured because we share an ambition for a peaceful, stable Indo-Pacific. We share an ambition to ensure that our military cooperation is at the cutting edge so that we can create the type of deterrence and type of environment that achieves that peaceful, stable Indo-Pacific region. And so, yes, I'm confident we will continue to see that support come through from the US. They, of course, need to see Australia invest and deliver credibly at our end. And in Senate estimates this week, we continue to hear some real concerns about the degree to which the defence budget in Australia is under pressure. It's seen cuts, it's seen redirections, it's not getting reimbursed for money that's been committed to Ukraine. There's pressure in terms of the inflation impacts on defence budget as well, and they're real concerns too.
We're just running out of time, but I just want to ask you, during his speech in the US, Anthony Albanese made pointed remarks about China. He said China does not see itself as a status quo power and the international community must uphold sovereignty and freedom of navigation and the rules-based order. What do you make of those comments, considering the PM is travelling to China next week? Are those comments going to make his China trip more difficult?
It's important the PM goes to China next week with clear messages from Australia. Clear messages in terms of the bilateral relationship where the types of trade sanctions that do still remain in place should be removed and removed forthwith, not delayed through review, but they should be removed. While we welcome the release of Cheng Lei, China continues to detain Dr. Yang Hengjun, and the Prime Minister should be clear about that. He should be clear in terms of Australians who have been targeted by Hong Kong authorities with harassment or bounties put on their head, that's unacceptable. And in the regional context, he should be clear about Australia's continued expectation for China to respect the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and to not be undertaking the type of dangerous actions we've seen with the Philippines in recent times and those actions in waters which could lead to miscalculation and are not showing that respect for international law that we should expect of a player and partner like China.
Simon Birmingham, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.